Good morning, everybody. It is cold this morning. It's 36 degrees, January, it's New Year. I'm doing something a little bit different today. So I am headed out to go meet the fencing team to actually go install a rattlesnake fence on my childhood home where my parents live. So I have 4 kids and they're always hanging out in the backyard. I have nieces that hang out back there. And growing up, we actually had a fair amount of rattlesnakes get into that yard. And so as a parent, as an uncle, I am quite ready to get a rattlesnake fence installed out there. And their place is a classic example of a standard backyard that gets rattlesnakes in it that we actually install fencing in. So let's head out there right now and hopefully it'll warm up a little bit before we start working. All right, so right back there behind me is the street that I actually grew up on. And the reason there are so many rattlesnakes in my neighborhood is this. Look at this. So we got this desert here. That goes about a mile or 2 before the next big main road, and then there's desert again over that way. We have this wash that goes right through the subdivision all the way out to the next subdivision until it kind of peters out. That can easily harbor rattlesnakes, easily harbor a lot of wildlife. Remember when I grew up, I had javelina, coyotes, bobcats, all sorts of things going into this wash and hanging out in those trees. And I think one of the first rattlesnakes I ever saw was a baby rattlesnake when I was a kid. It was actually crossing the road right there and going into that wash. Look at all those houses, look at all those exposed fences right there. That is the reason that we had rattlesnakes. There's a perfect travel corridor for them to come in right there. And here is my childhood backyard. There's that wash. Now, where my kids and nieces hang out and play. Growing up, we had, I think the first rattlesnake that we had was just right here over this fence. It was a little bit more vegetated at the time. It was actually right there crawling through the bushes, and we saw it there. We saw other things like coach whips and gopher snakes throughout the years. There was a large diamondback rattlesnake that was just over the other side of the wall right there, which could have easily gotten through this. There's a little aviary here, which could easily have gotten through this drain block right here, or that wall gap just over there. Now, something that a lot of homeowners do, we get asked about this a lot, and we see a lot of like DIYers or like handymen or people that do this. They say, well, the rattlesnakes are coming from this wash. I only want to have this fence done here. Now, the issue with that is a couple things. Another one of the rattlesnakes was actually a big Mojave rattlesnake, was actually hanging out here by the garbage cans. And it was not actually uncommon at all to walk out in the morning and see dead rattlesnakes, particularly little baby diamondbacks or Mojave rattlesnakes actually dead out on this road. And actually one of the baby rattlesnakes that I saw growing up, we used to have a little pile of rocks right here, and there was actually a little baby coiled up in there. I was out here talking to a friend and looked down, and there was a little baby just coiled up right there. It was rocks, river rocks, kind of like that, but they were right there at that one point. So what that means is that there are other rattlesnakes that maybe came out through, from the wash or traveled down the road from yard to yard that actually would come in here. And there's a couple entry points that people often overlook. Is we got drain blocks, we got wall gaps, and then we have gates. So if we were to have a rattlesnake go under the gate and into the backyard and have that backyard sealed off, that actually creates a bigger problem than if you didn't have rattlesnake fencing on that fence at all. Because what we see a lot of times is snakes will go under the gate or under the drain block and come out and travel and want to get into this wash, right? They may use the resources that are in the backyard if there are any, but they want to get back out into that wash ultimately. And mesh is often confusing to them. So they'll just go back and forth along this fence line trying to get back out there. And what you have is kind of a funnel trap situation where we are going to have pet rattlesnakes in this yard until it is inevitably found, and hopefully not found, in a tragic manner. So it's extremely important that if you do rattlesnake fencing, you do the entire perimeter, not just one fence line or just the gates or just one element of it. If you actually want it to work and you want to actually avoid a more dangerous situation than you were in originally. How do you know if a gap in a wall or in a fence is big enough for a baby rattlesnake to get in? Now, Brian's made videos about this before that we'll link down in the description. Baby rattlesnakes can get in any gap that is larger than a 1/4 inch in width. And a really easy way to test if a gap in your wall or in your gate or anything is big enough for a baby rattlesnake to get in is a ballpoint pen, or if you want to be even more precise, and what our installers use is the back end of a drill bit that is exactly 1/4 inch for a 1/4 inch drive. So you see these gates, you know, obviously that's big enough, right? That's a couple inches there. We'll seal that up when Hippie gets here. But if we're looking at these gaps right here, they say, well, the wood slats, you know, and what we do is we get the drill bit to slip through. Yep, so we're gonna have to cover that face. Little tiny pinholes or wall gaps, often overlooked. It goes all the way through. Obviously, that's a lot bigger than a 1/4 inch. So that poses a risk for baby rattlesnakes entering. So we're gonna seal that up. A couple other overlooked things is sometimes from the inside you don't see if you have little holes or entryways. You see this was a drain block and it goes over here and it's kind of underground. Now rodents, they like to burrow through these and underneath and into the yard. And I actually had an experience last year where I was at a property and I was having this exact conversation with a homeowner, and I hopped over and I said, I want to see if there's any missing drain blocks. He's like, well, I don't think there are. And I went over and I hopped over just like I did, and there was a small western diamondback actually coiled up inside one of those little gaps there. So we want to make sure, even though that's kind of covered right now, it's not quite deep enough to feel like a rodent can't actually get through there. So we're actually going to seal that up as well. Another standard that we've developed from experimenting with live snakes at our facility, as well as just doing this for 10 years, is a large diamondback, biggest one out here, can't get over a flat vertical surface, smooth flat vertical surface over 30 inches. So when we look at fences and we're determining what we need to do with a property, we determine that, you know, how high is the block wall? Brian made another excellent video that we'll put down in the description about rattlesnakes climbing over flat vertical surfaces. But here, that's obviously less than that. So diamondbacks or rattlesnakes can easily get over and through those bars. So what we do is we attach our mesh here. Ideally, we like to get it 36 inches to be safe. We attach it here with screws so it's nice and tight. It's not going to sag. And we attach it all the way around onto the block so it is nice and snug and snakes can't get over. So my mom actually came out and saw me filming and came out and said, make sure to mention that when we moved in and we asked our neighbors and everything about snakes, and they said, no, there aren't any snakes here. We've never had any snakes whatsoever. And apparently my brother and I caught one within a week of living here. So, and that's a really good point to remember, that just because your HOA or your neighbors or whoever says that there are not rattlesnakes, I know there's desert, but we've never seen a rattlesnake, that really doesn't matter at all. It all comes down to personal experience and how observant you are. Just because people say there aren't snakes doesn't mean that there aren't snakes. All right, looks like he's arrived. This is Hippie, our production manager.
How you doing?
Fence extraordinaire. So we're gonna get started. Backyard.
Yeah.
Alright. Alright, so I'm doing these drains. One thing that is often overlooked is the way these drains are covered. A lot of times what we see is people will like put a mesh, or, you know, mesh will be wrong, or even if the mesh is right, what they'll do is they'll just shove it up against here, maybe put rocks against it or something like that, or glue it, and it doesn't really quite work. These wall gaps are hugely overlooked when making snake fencing. Like, you can get all of this here, you can even do the gate, but if you miss one wall gap, then again, you make a funnel trap and you're gonna have a rattlesnake visitor. So we're gonna seal all those up and check very closely for anything like this and seal those up. Because every gate is different, we have this custom steel here for every little gap. Because it doesn't matter what property it is, there's no one size fits all, so this custom steel really is necessary. Right?
Yes.
Looking good. Takes a good fat minute, probably more than the installation itself, to get this mesh actually hung and aligned, because if you get it wrong, you're gonna have big old bubbles and everything. Now, a comment I know that we're gonna get, because we do get this question a lot, is like, you're putting screws in here, isn't that going to be a rust issue or a structural issue? First of all, we don't put any of these screws in these major posts, because that is where the structural integrity is. There isn't really any structural integrity here to these little posts. They're not attached to the block there. The other thing is that the screws are actually better in terms of rust, exterior rust, because the wires, if you were to put wire ties around there, it rubs over time and scuffs all the paint off, and then you have this ring of rust all the way around. Also, these bars are not watertight when they're manufactured. First of all, they are actually wet. Part of the process of these being constructed is that they're actually wet. Also, usually these top caps or these areas or even the welds are not watertight. So adding the screws here is not necessarily hurting, you know, you're not causing the fence to fail due to rust, because there's already over the years these things do fill with water in the rain. But as far as these screws go, we do have neoprene washers and everything to mitigate these problems. And my parents actually did have chicken wire for rabbits here. It didn't do anything for rattlesnakes, obviously, because we had snakes in the yard. But they did have chicken wire, and it was painted before, and the chicken wire ended up scrunching down over time, just because kids, or if you have dogs or anything like that, it scrunched down, scraped the paint, and lowered the height so that anything you could get over. So when we can, we always like to use these screws here. It's a far better system. Off to the next part. If it goes straight to the ground, we actually hand trench it to get right down underground so that erosion or rodents can't burrow up under. So I'm kind of lucky in that we don't have to do that today. That is looking pretty good. You may or may not know this, but there's actually mesh on the other side of this. Another thing I used to do when I was about a teenager and I realized that looking for and targeting snakes was a thing, is because I knew there were snakes back here, I actually set out boards along the edge of this tree right here, and I'd flip them and got coach whips under them quite often. So that was always an interesting thing. So these washes really do harbor a ton of wildlife, as you can see. Alright, well there it is, in all its glory, in all his glory. Nice, and that's the inside, and then this outside. That looks pretty neat. All right, well, we are all finished. It's looking nice and tidy. It's time to go home. All right, well, that about wraps it up. I can't tell you how much peace of mind there is with all the encounters that I had growing up with rattlesnakes and snakes in this yard. And now that my kids and nieces are hanging out here, I don't have to worry and be texting my mom and be like, hey, can you make sure to do the walk around before they go outside, you know, come spring and monsoon season. So as you can see, we use hard, sturdy materials with snake specific knowledge from years and years of experience with snakes to make sure that this is actually rattlesnake proof for the long term instead of just a band-aid fix. So it's time to go home. If you like this kind of content, I know it's kind of different from our normal stuff, but it is the day in the life for Rattlesnake Solutions. So if you like this kind of stuff and you want to see more of it, let us know, or any feedback that you may have, and we'll see you on the next one.